Hello, this is Howard Owens, publisher of the Batavian. Was a very busy week last week. We didn't get to a lot of live stream interviews, but we're back this week. Got several lined up already, and looking forward to talking to some of the people in our community and beyond about what's going on in the news and how that's impacting various aspects of our society. And of course, one of the big impacts has been with agriculture. And so we've got one of the county's leading farmers and farm experts and agriculture experts on the line today, and that's Craig Yunker. So, Craig, how you doing?
Good.
Good to see you. So, first of all, just what are we seeing so far locally with the impact on agriculture related primarily to coronavirus?
So the impacts are many. What's been in the news that we've seen is uh, a surplus of milk, too much milk because of the demand shift as schools closed, restaurants closed, didn't need as much milk, so the and that's been reflected in the price as well. There's also been some vegetables here locally dumped. The storage cabbage that was to be marketed throughout the winter and into the spring, that market for cabbage had the same impact. Basically, people don't eat a lot of cabbage at home. It impacted cabbage consumption with the disruption of St. Patrick's Day, and then continued as people didn't go to Friday fish fries where they tend to eat coleslaw. So there has been truckloads of cabbage locally dumped here. There was a disruption in the onion market. So the storage vegetables were impacted. That's come back to some extent. The potatoes and onions has come back some, but the cabbage thing was pretty bad. It's also, of course, affected um, the grain markets, corn, soybeans, both of those, both on the Chicago Board futures market and the cash market, have been affected. The corn market's been affected. Corn is used for ethanol production. Ethanol is used to blend with gasoline. Gasoline consumption is way off because of people not driving. And so many ethanol plants across the country have closed. New York has two ethanol plants. One of those is closed. The one, Western New York Energy in Medina, is still open, still taking corn, although my sense is that that may be at a reduced run rate. About the projection is that half of the ethanol plants in the country will close. That will reduce the demand for corn. The other impact we're seeing on the corn market is um, the backup caused by slaughter plant closings because of coronavirus affecting processing plant workers. And Smithfield, among others, has closed plants. They are now talking about euthanizing hogs, chickens, because those animals are ready to go to slaughter, but there's no demand with those plants closed. So that just backs up. It affects those markets, which affect the grain markets, and all the way back through. So agriculture is very concerned about its impact. There's a concern locally about labor. Um, in some cases, in our case, we were expecting some workers through the H-2A program to come April 1st. They're obviously not here. We've hired some local people to sort of fill in for them, some local people that were available, including a high school boy that's worked for us for a couple of years and now he's basically available full time. So there's a lot of impacts. Agriculture is feeling it like the rest of the economy.
Can you give us a sense of how much our local farms are hurting from this, both the larger and smaller operations?
Um, the Generally, the dairy farms are being impacted the most currently because the milk price, they're shipping milk every day. The milk price has really much lower, and that's affecting their cash flow today. So I would sense that the farms most affected right now are those that are shipping milk and those that had stored product um, that and that doesn't matter on what size, whether you're a large or small producer, you're being impacted by the lower markets.
If I'm not that familiar with any of the government programs out there to assist farmers. For a lot of small businesses, there's the PPP loan program, the emergency relief program. What's going on to help, kind of at the federal and state level, to help farmers? And related to that, the governor announced, I think yesterday, about buying produce for food banks. So maybe you could address that too.
Yeah, I think the ag community in general is a little disappointed in the federal response to that. USDA, um, our sense is that USDA didn't get up to speed very quickly on buying products. You saw, the pictures of the green beans and Florida being plowed under and squash fields and things like that. We don't have those products in, it's planting time now. So we didn't have those products to be plowed under like you saw in Florida locally here. But we did have some products dumped because of the demand. But the dairy farmers are very, very affected by this. And grain farmers, people that have stored corn and soybeans that haven't been priced yet, they are being impacted by the lower markets. Um, the the discussion going on now is how will this affect planning for this year? You know, is there a shift from one commodity to another in a response to the changing demands? I know I've talked to people like Maureen Torrey. I heard her say that you're worried about whether you should plant vegetables like squash or cucumbers that have a very small harvest window. When they're ready, they have to be harvested, and that's a concern both from a labor standpoint and also market demand standpoint. So there's discussions going on about planting. We have planted our normal acreage of onions, for instance. Onions is a product that when we harvest it, we'll store it, so we have a much longer window. That's been, all of our onions are in the ground planted. That went fairly normal. We're now gearing up to plant some peas. That's a processing crop. And the processing vegetable industry here locally in the Glow region that produces corn, green beans, green peas, beets, those kind of products that are generally frozen or canned, those have been moving very well. I had a conversation with the president of Seneca Foods, a large canning company that contracts for vegetables in the area, and their inventories have been moving very well. So we expect the acreage for those crops to be normal, if not up a bit this year.
We've seen on the news reports like the Smithfield plants, a couple of them have shut down. Another, I think a Tyson or another meat processing plant has shut down, and that's led to reports that we might start seeing shortages of meat in grocery stores. Do you think we're going to see shortages of food, not just of meat, but anything else, just because of what's happening now and what that might mean later?
I think that you'll see disruptions in the supply. There's plenty of capacity. If the plants can open up and start again, there may be intermittent and spot shortages. I wouldn't expect um, we in the United States to see shortages of food.
Kind of like toilet paper. We had intermittent disruption there for a while.
Right, right. It's just the whole economy is so intertwined, and the supply chains are fairly complex that when you have a disruption like a pandemic that we're having, it's just hard to keep things moving smoothly. And we're gonna see disruptions for a while, I believe.
So, given what you're seeing in the agriculture market and then what you follow in the news, have you been satisfied with the way either government or society has responded to this? Do you think it's been appropriate, necessary?
It's hard to compare it with much, isn't it? I mean, you say, did society respond appropriately? Trying to put it into some sort of comparison with how we should have behaved. And hindsight is always great. Generally, I remember in hearing about emergency responses. Generally, we don't take emergencies seriously enough at the outset when we could be most effective in dealing with them. And I think that was in part the case here, that we were slow to respond on the front end. I think that's not unusual for emergencies. We should have responded more quickly and taken it seriously. But certainly the Federal Reserve has taken on a huge role, even maybe twice the role that it had during the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, and expanded the money supply 2 times what it was during that recession. That's a huge response, and someday we'll pay the price for that huge increase in the money supply. But I generally think that Powell did the right thing in terms of putting money out there. There's been some criticisms of some of the programs. You brought up the Paycheck Protection Program, the forgivable loans. Some of those loans went out. The story in the paper was with Chris Steakhouse and those Shake Shack and those kind of companies being given those forgivable loans. But those they will do a lot of good in keeping people employed. And I think they're probably going to run out of money on the second round for that program again. We're in the second round now. The first round did not satisfy the demand by small business.
Yeah, what I know about economics. I'm a big fan of the program because I think they're calling it small business loans, but it's payroll, so it's really the most effective way to get stimulus money into the hands of a lot of workers and ensure people stay employed.
I saw a suggestion by Steve Forbes a week or so ago, and his suggestion was that we freeze and stop the payroll tax. That you just stop collecting payroll tax, and all the employed people would have a 7.5% pay increase immediately. Businesses that are employing people would have a decrease in their share, and it would be very easy to administer. You wouldn't have the disruption. You could do it very quickly, and just sort of freeze the payroll tax for the rest of the year, and that would be a way to help the lower paid workers the most, because FICA is only up to 150,000 or whatever. and it would be and maybe that's a program that should be used in what they're calling the fourth round of stimulus. I guess I would support that kind of action.
The what do you think? Do you have any thoughts on kind of where the economy is going to go from here? Do we get out of any kind of recession quickly? Is it even appropriate to call this a recession if that's the case, or do you think that this is going to have a lot of long-term ripple effects?
Yeah, I I I just don't see how we come out of this with a V-shaped curve where we were at 3.5% unemployment and we're going to go back to full employment. I just think that we're changing consumer behavior. We are such a consumer-driven economy, which is which is different than the economy uh, 20, 40, 50 years ago. So much of our economy is consumer-driven, and we have really restricted that. Consumer behavior, I don't believe, is going to change so quickly that this economy just bounces back. I think this is, 18, 24 months minimum, maybe longer than that. I lost your,
I'm sorry, I had the volume down in case the dog barked in the background. Uh, the New York Times had a story today out of China about how even though the economy's reopened, consumers aren't coming back, either because of lack of money, or and so they're not spending the way they used to, or there's still concerns about going out into public, going to bars and restaurants, that sort of activity, other social activities that help stimulate the economy, and that and this goes along with what I've seen from economists. There's no magic switch on the economy. We don't just turn it back on. A lot is up to how people decide to behave.
I agree with that. Even if the bars and restaurants open up overnight, there will be many people reluctant, hesitant to go into crowded bars and restaurants again, and there may not be as many doors open as were open before. It's a tough business with narrow margins, and some of those businesses are not going to make it. It will have a ripple effect.
Yeah. So and that will kind of wrap up, kind of bring this back together. Is plant. You kind of touched on this already, but in the agricultural sector, planning for, as you mentioned earlier, we're in uncharted territory. There's never really been an event exactly like this. I mean, the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, we didn't shut down society. We didn't have the same sort of knowledge. There was no vaccine for it, and so things were handled differently. Other pandemics since then, things have been handled differently. The response and the nature of this virus were so different that we've responded differently. And so we're really in uncharted territory. So you as a businessman, especially in agriculture, how do you plan going forward?
We need to do everything we do better. We need to pay attention to detail, do our job right, and ask our team members here to step up. We have to do it right. We have to stay the course, and we will. We will. There are some good things that, in terms of our budget, we will be facing lower interest rates for our loans. We are buying fuel at lower costs than we have. It should affect fertilizer prices as well. So we expect to make it through this, but the economy in general is going to be more difficult for all of us, I think.
Greg, wish I could think of something that maybe help us end on a more positive note. But it's always good to see you. Is there anything else that you wanted to add?
Good to see you, Howard. I want to thank you for what you do. There was a piece someplace that I read about news organizations trying to make it through this as well. They have employees to pay too, and they have advertising dollars that they're trying to sell ads to keep their organizations afloat. And news is important. Local news is important. I want to thank you for what you do there.
Well, thank you. That's very nice. And I just want to, say I'm very grateful to the community for their continuing support. Our advertisers, our sponsors, have remained incredibly loyal and supportive, even as they're going through difficulty. And the ride hasn't been without bumps, but it hasn't been nearly as rough as I was anticipating to be. And I really appreciate you've always been a strong supporter of the Batavian, so I appreciate you and I appreciate your time today.
Okay, Art.
Thanks. You take care.
All right.
This is Howard Owens of the Batavian. Another live stream interview with we did this with Craig Yunker, CEO of CY Farms today. Talk about agriculture. 3:00 we've got another interview coming up, and continue to follow us throughout the week and throughout the day for updates on the situation. You all take care.